So, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're going to do something just a bit different than some of my standard webinars. Today we're going to focus on 5 ways Onshape will save you time over traditional CAD. And so, a lot of what we're going to focus on today is a lot of the effort and energy that's dedicated to using traditional CAD today and how Onshape hopes to solve these problems. So, I want to give you 5 examples where a lot of users are wasting their time using traditional CAD today and how Onshape can resolve these issues. So a bit different than a traditional training style webinar today, we're going to do something you really just kind of highlight why we created Onshape. What are the things we hope to solve with Onshape? So let's dig in. Now, as I always say with these webinars, we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. Um, as I'm going through this, I do my best to stop from time to time and address any questions. So again, feel free to type anything into the questions dialog. If I don't answer your question, stick around. I'll make sure to answer all of them before we're done here today. So 5 ways Onshape will save you time over a traditional CAD application. Let's dig in. Now, before I get into the topic of the day, there are a few things I'd like to mention about Onshape in general. And the first is our mission, and that is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. So if you haven't yet used our mobile apps, if you haven't yet logged in from another machine that you don't use every day, that's one of the biggest benefits of Onshape is your CAD data is accessible. And it's a big part of what we're going to talk about here today. Some of our mission and goals with Onshape is to give you the ability to access your CAD data from anywhere. So everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. Now, the other thing I always like to highlight is we do consider Onshape professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, of course, it's parts, assemblies, and drawings. And we do have all 3 major pieces that make up a professional 3D CAD system. Some other things that are unique is within Onshape, you have built-in version control. It's not a separate application that has to be installed or managed. It's built into the core functionality of Onshape. Also with Onshape, you have the ability to read and write a lot of common CAD formats. So if you have a library of CAD data in another system, if you're using Onshape alongside your current CAD system, we can read and write a lot of the standard formats that are out there today. The last thing I want to mention is entirely new methods of collaboration. It's one of the biggest benefits of Onshape, and it's one of the things we're going to look at here today is, what does a typical user do today versus how Onshape hopes to solve that problem. And so we're going to take a look at some methods Onshape uses and some methods that traditional CAD users use today. So let's dig in. Now, the goals for today, I really just want to highlight 5 ways traditional CAD applications waste your time today and how Onshape solves those problems. As I mentioned before, these are just 5 examples, but they really kind of highlight a big part of the reason for why Onshape was created, why it was necessary to build a CAD application from scratch. When you do that, you have the ability to solve real problems for engineers. And I think what I'd like to do today is just try to highlight some of those problems that we hope to solve with Onshape. As I mentioned before, feel free to ask any questions that you'd like. I'll do my best to stop and answer them. So let's dig in. Now, the first method that I want to discuss, or the first way that you can waste a lot of time in a traditional CAD application is with the installation. It's a very common, very long process that oftentimes has to be done maybe once a year, 2-3 times a year, depending on how much time you want to spend on it. And it's often a very long and tedious process. And so one of the goals when we set out to build Onshape was how do we solve the issue of installation, having to deal with distributing installations and managing the errors and all the support needed just to manage installations of the software. So installation is one of the first pains that is traditionally involved with a big CAD application. Sometimes the downloads can be in excess of 10 gigs. So gigantic downloads for CAD applications that can take hours, overnight sometimes, just to download the software. And then the installation itself, of course, ties up the machine and takes a decent amount of time in and of itself, anywhere from 15 minutes to, an hour. So, installation itself can take a long time. The download can take a long time. It's a lot of data. And then if you're diligent about it and you want to maintain the latest versions and so on, you'll install service packs or updates to your CAD application, which is another process of downloading a patch and then installing it. And again, throughout this entire process, the big thing is hoping that there are no errors. So as you go through the install, make sure that you have all prerequisites and all the details there. Otherwise, you'll be going through and troubleshooting your installation and so on, which just makes it much more time. The other issue with installation is there's no real clean way to distribute it amongst many, many users very easily, right? The data needs to be copied around back and forth in order to install, which means the more users you have, the more time this takes. So of course, much, much more time involved with installations. The bigger the organization, the more time is involved in the installation process. Now, a question that has come up, and it's a good question, in the case of a cloud CAD like this, is the client's video card involved in the viewing process? And the answer is yes, we are using the video card. What's unique about Onshape is we're using WebGL to render it. We're not using OpenGL like a traditional CAD system, which means we're not dependent on specific hardware. Just about any hardware supports WebGL. So that includes phones. That's why we can get away with a true mobile CAD app. And Chromebooks, Linux, Mac, Windows, just about any modern computer with a modern browser. But we do rely on some video memory. It's just not nearly as much and not as specific as a traditional CAD application. So downloads, as I mentioned, very large. The installation process, again, can take some time where the machine is tied up. And of course, this whole time you're hoping for no errors. If there are errors, you'll end up troubleshooting or reaching out to support or so on. So this process for an average engineer can take anywhere from a few hours to a day of an engineer's time in a given year. And that's a rough guess, of course, but that's something that to consider. How much time are you installing and managing the installation of the CAD application? So our solution to this with Onshape is just to have no installation, no downloads, no installation. The CAD data is entirely in a browser. So if you're familiar with Google Docs, for example, there is no installation to access your document. You log in and you have access to Google Docs. And the same idea, the same concept applies to Onshape. Your CAD data does not require an installation to access. And what this means is you don't have to manually update or manage any kind of updates. There's no downloads. You can access it from anywhere, and everyone's always on the latest version. So a lot of the version compatibility issues are resolved. A lot of the tedious effort of installing and going back and forth with updates and downloads is resolved. The user's allowed to focus on CAD and not the administrative duties of installing, or even just the time wasted on those administrative duties. So the last thing I want to mention is, with this process, you're not troubleshooting errors. So if you've ever sat there and tried to figure out what this error means and how do I fix it and how do I get the software installed, those kinds of things you can really struggle with. So the idea behind Onshape is simplicity. You don't need to install, update, never deal with version compatibility, and you're not wasting time hassling with any of these things. So that's the first headache that I wanted to point out, and it's just that in general, installations never a fun process. It's just kind of a required or a necessary evil of working with any installed application. It's just one of those things that you have to deal with. Now, the next one that I want to focus on is file management. And it's another element of traditional CAD altogether that takes a lot of resources. In fact, there are some organizations, larger organizations that'll have a full-time person dedicated to nothing but this task, managing CAD data, because it's such a large task. When we talk about how we manage who has access to what at what times, and how do we manage, who has what copy or the latest versions or any of those kinds of details, and passing files back and forth and so on, becomes a task to itself. In fact, a lot of times users will go out and buy a separate data management application just to handle this, just to work more cleanly with files among many users. So file management is one of the biggest headaches that a traditional CAD user has today, and it just means that you have to spend a lot of time figuring out the actual administrative duties. Is this the latest version? Is it the right file? Do I need to replace references? And hope again that there aren't issues, things like corrupt files that cause issues, or crashes that cause issues. So File management, the big things with file management is oftentimes you have to create this file and folder structure, right? You have to build a structure, you have to create a naming convention in order for everybody to stick to it. And then often that leads inevitably to even more complex and expensive PDM system, which is a whole separate software just meant to manage. Just meant to manage this. So you have PDM systems that were built just to hold files. And then if you don't have these issues, if you don't have file management issues, you have which is the latest version, especially if I'm working with other users. Do I have the latest version? Do I have read-write access to the files? What are the permissions associated with the files? And then also backups. Do you backup each version? How do you manage the backups? What happens when there are corrupt files? And if you haven't had a corrupt file, it's really just a file that's broken. You'll get a message that says failed to open it, and there's really little that you can do without a backup. And so there's whole process involved with file management in terms of managing all these details. But the biggest issues are when I check out an assembly, for example, no one else in the organization has any visibility about what's going on with that. So I could be checked out for days or weeks, and no one knows what happened to the assembly or what updates are going on or anything until I check that back in. So there's also this lack of visibility within these organizations because of this isolated file-based nature. You really don't see anything updating. No one knows what's going on until a file has been checked back in, right, or is saved. So file management in general is one of the biggest CAD pains that users run into, and it's definitely one of the ones that I wanted to point out here today. Now, again, with Onshape, our approach to this is just to simply have no files. So much like in an installation, the way to solve it is just to simply eliminate it. So there are no files with Onshape, and this means you do not have to manage any files or references or anything of the such. You just work in your Onshape documents, right? And so that's one of the important things to keep in mind. You do not have to manage files. There's never any broken references or having to manually move things around to get them to update. None of that happens in Onshape. One of the other biggest benefits to this is everyone's always on the latest version. So if you've ever opened up an assembly or tried to open up a part, for example, and it says you can't open this, it's in a future version, or you're constantly having to save in a neutral format because your vendor works in an older version of the software. So none of those issues exist with Onshape. We have everyone is always on the latest version, and so there are no compatibility with files. Also, no manual updates, right? Because files need to be updated quite frequently. You have a lot of things like having to go through and manually update files, or having the file slow to load in the first time until it's saved. So manually updating your files or going through and updating files on a regular basis is also a tedious process. And so the idea behind it is we don't spend any time managing files. We don't spend any time managing all the headaches of files and folder structures and corrupt files and so on. All of that is eliminated. With an Onshape document, it's a database-driven system that allows us to revert back to any point, and it tracks everything automatically for us. So the idea of save or the idea of replacing references or any of those things really doesn't exist. And it's a much cleaner approach. It allows you to not have to worry about it. You completely forget about files after much use of Onshape. So the next one I want to point out, the next one on my list, is collaboration. So one of the biggest headaches that we run into with users in a traditional CAD system is trying to collaborate. How do I work with someone else in maybe a different version, or even just outside of my organization? Or how do I collaborate even with those inside of my organization? How do I know that this subassembly is being used by this person while another part's being edited by another? And how do I work with them? And this is one of the biggest issues that traditional CAD users face today, and it's a big part of what we talked about in the last example, and that's just files. Managing files makes collaboration difficult because you still have this passing of individual bits of information that have the same read-write, problems that any traditional installed application has. So collaboration is one of the biggest headaches that a traditional CAD user has. How do I work with someone else and I need to send them something, or I need to show them my CAD model? whether it's vendors or maybe it's sales or someone you're just trying to show, it's a tedious process. And so some of the things I always like to point out with collaboration, at least the way it's done today, is it's often done with email and emailing with file attachments. That is, unless, of course, the file itself is too big, and then it needs to be uploaded to a cloud storage service. You need to get a link, and then you can paste the link in the email, or you can share it from the. I mean, there are a few methods, but it's still a tedious process, right? So I need to upload or attach the file. I then need to send it. And then the user that I'm sending this to, the person I'm sending this to, also has responsibilities. They have things that they have to do. In most situations, they have to download and install something, whether it's a viewer or another CAD application. They have work they have to do just to view your file. So they download and install this viewer, hope for no errors or issues that we talked about in our installation section. And then they finally are able to open up and edit or just view the model, depending on what their role is. But the biggest problem is now you have no idea what's going on, right? If they are allowed to edit, if they're actually editing the part, you really have no visibility on that. You don't know what's going on in terms of the edits. And the other problem with this is, you really don't know, you have no way to communicate with them. So if they have an issue, oftentimes it means capturing a screenshot, marking up the screenshot and sending another email. Right? And then we send an email back and forth about the screenshot. So this is often the method for collaboration today. How do I express that this is the whole that I'm talking about? I grab a screenshot of it and send an email. Right? But that method, of course, is a tedious one by itself. Right? You have a whole nother string of emails associated with, a whole or a fillet or something. And the other problem with this is when you work with someone and they are actually editing the models and you need to update your model, it means replacing a lot of broken references. It means replacing maybe mate references that needed to be updated. So there's all kinds of things that can happen when you replace a file with another. So this is typically how collaboration is done today. Now, there are methods when we can talk about, allowing users into my VPN vault with all kinds of special techniques, but most users today are sending emails with CAD files attached to them, unless it's too big, of course. And that means one of the biggest things I want to point out about this as well is that once the email is sent and once the file is downloaded, you've lost control of it. So if there's not great security on their end, if the person you're sending it to may not have the best morals, you don't know what's going to happen to that file, and so you really can't restrict or pull back the file, right? I can't say no longer have access to it, and so that's one of the other big negatives to a file-based system is once you send the file, there's no getting it back, right? I can't undo that. I can't then restrict access to it later. So this is collaboration as it exists in traditional CAD today. And the idea behind Onshape is, again, to eliminate a lot of this. With the file management comes a whole series of problems about isolation and issues with collaboration. With Onshape, those ideas go away, right? Because we're not working with files, there are no read-write permissions. Everyone can see the assembly in real time. So I can share a document and everyone on the team can see an update. Everyone on the team can see the progress in real time. So the big things here is, you're not sending emails with file attachments. There's a share button. You enter their email address, you hit share, and they're looking at the same thing you are in real time. So there's not copies of files going back and forth. And we've also built in tools to eliminate the need to do the email screenshot markup workflow. Right? We have integrated comment capabilities that allow us to tag features, so I can right-click a hole and say, is this the right diameter? We also have a tool called follow mode that allows us to see each other's screen in real time. So if I want to highlight a part of the model, I can have someone follow me and then point out things. I don't need to mark up the screen, grab screenshots, send emails back and forth. It's a very clean way to work with others. The last thing I want to mention is with Onshape, I'm not sending data to a permanent person that's a database server or another email server, for instance, where it's going to sit forever. With Onshape, I'm sharing my document with someone, and I can remove that permission in the future. So once I'm done working with that person, I can remove the permission associated with the document, and they no longer have access to it. So the big thing is you remain in control of that intellectual property throughout the entire process with Onshape, and we're not sending files back and forth. Now, I wanted to do just a quick demo of sharing. If you haven't shared your document yet, I definitely recommend it, but there are a few things I wanted to point out, especially with this topic of collaboration. So one of the first is how to share. How do I share my document? And again, a traditional CAD system today, it means attaching a file to an email, sending it, and then also sending a link to download and install some viewer or application. With Onshape, they don't have to download or install anything, right? Because it runs in a browser, all you do is hit share and you enter their email address. Okay. Define their permissions, a very important step. Do I want to give them permission to edit or just simply view the document, right? And then hit share. That person can then see the document instantly, right? They do not have to download and install anything. They literally click a link and they're looking at the same thing you are. In fact, you'll get little visual cues that they're in the document. So you'll see here a little C indicating that now someone else is in this document. I can see visual cues that they're in the document. If someone creates a feature, you'll see it listed, right? So if I go in and add a part, for instance, if I go into one of these parts, let's say, and add a new fill, you're going to see visual feedback that new features are being created. So you get real-time feedback as to what's going on. I don't have to wait for someone to check a file in to figure out what happened and then move on, right? So there isn't this process of waiting for so-and-so to finish before I can do my thing because, again, we can work together in the same document. So you get real-time feedback. You can work together either on the same parts, same assemblies, or different parts within the same document, but you're always aware of what's going on. Now, this is one element of it, and that's a real-time collaboration. Again, we're not a file-based system, so it allows us to do things like allow multiple people work on the same assembly at the same time, or the same part at the same time. But it also allows us to do a number of things that really change how people collaborate in CAD. And one of the biggest is, handling that email comment workflow, with screenshots. Where I grab a screenshot, I mark it up, I send it an email, and then I get replies back and forth until we figure out what the issue is. And so we've built some tools into Onshape that can really help in those kinds of situations where you're trying to communicate with someone that may be a vendor, maybe it's someone that you're working with, and not have to grab screenshots and chat back and forth about it. So it's very easy in Onshape to create a comment. And the idea behind comments is I can tag features behind them. So I can right-click this circle, for instance, and say add comment and say, is this hole diameter right? I can add the comment. Anyone in this document, well, in my case, we'll get email notifications. I can turn that on or off. And now we can chat together in the document. And what's neat about this is the user will see that circle is being identified with the comment. So if I exit the comment here real quickly, if I click comments, you'll notice it highlights the circle. And I can left click and it will highlight the actual comment associated with it. So it's a way for me to tag a feature and say, hey, is this right? Without having to send emails with screenshots and markups attached to them. Right? And we can even chat in the document. Okay, so he can reply. I'll see the reply update in real time, so we can chat with each other. And there's not, again, this tedious, laborious process of sending emails with attachments back and forth. We get real-time updates, real-time feedback. Now, if it gets even more complicated, and I'm really trying to explain a lot of detail, something I don't want to do with text, we also have what we call follow mode. And the idea behind follow mode is it allows you to see their screen in real time. So if I double click this icon, the social cue for the person that's logged into my document, if I double click on that, I'm then looking at their screen in real time. So I can see a cursor indicating where they're at. They can highlight different features, and you can see it live. Right? So now I'm looking at my collaborator's screen, and they can point out, no, this is the issue I'm having. these fillets are too large, for example. I can point to exactly what I'm referring to. So it's a very easy way to communicate, if I'm trying to get across something that's a little bit more complicated or something I don't necessarily want to do with a comment. Again, follow mode just eliminates that workflow of having to point things out with screenshots and emails. So that is follow mode, and it's again just a series of tools that allows us to better collaborate than we have in many traditional CAD applications in the past. Okay, so moving on. Again, collaboration, it's really just all about the architecture of Onshape and the ability for us to collaborate in real time because we're not based on files and a series of files. Now, the fourth that I have is accessibility, and this one is particularly for those that may travel or may not work in the same location all the time, a particularly big one, because in traditional CAD applications, your software and your CAD data is often associated with one computer. It's tied to one computer, and this really limits your ability to move around or change machines or access your CAD data without that one computer. So the big thing I wanted to point out with this is, in general, a CAD license is tied to one or two machines, and that's it. And those machines, because of traditional CAD applications, tend to be big and expensive. CAD workstations are definitely not the cheapest computers, and they're also, tend to be very heavy. Now, some recent machines are certainly improving, but in general, CAD workstations tend to be big and heavy. So moving them around isn't always the easiest thing. But also, you become very dependent on that one machine. If there are issues with it, there are big, problems. There are showstoppers that can really stop productivity. So the big thing is, if you're not near that machine, your CAD data is really inaccessible. So if you're not near that CAD workstation, if you're home, if you're traveling, um, you really can't access your CAD data. And I've seen users create all kinds of special techniques that allow them access to the machine. Go to My PC, for example, or creating complex VPNs to manage licenses, and all these techniques that allow them to access their CAD data from some other place than their CAD workstation. So accessibility is one of the biggest things I want to point out because A, you have to be in front of a specific machine generally to access your CAD data, but also B, you can't get to it from things like a mobile device. So in general, there are really no good mobile tools for editing CAD models until Onshape. So if you look around, there's really only viewers. And in the case of viewers, you still need to open a file in many situations. So, the CAD tools that are available for mobile devices are really limited when we start talking about traditional CAD systems. They're largely just viewers, maybe markup tools. Um, there's really not accessibility from a mobile device. And it also means you're very platform specific. So if I, use Windows at work, but I like Mac at home, you're really limiting yourself. I can't really install the same software at home on that computer. So if you like Chromebooks, if you like Linux, you don't really have those options in a traditional CAD system because of all the install requirements. So accessibility is a big issue. Just not just necessarily the compatibility, but also the cost of the CAD workstations. They're typically very expensive, which means I need a lot of money to get into CAD. So really trying to lower the threshold. With Onshape, we've done things quite a bit differently. So because it's entirely in a browser, you can access your CAD data from anywhere, and it doesn't have to be a high-end workstation. As I mentioned before, the graphics are rendered on your machine, but everything else in terms of the computation is done in the cloud. So you don't have to have thousands of dollars tied up in hardware. You can access your CAD data from any computer, which means you're not dependent on one machine. And the CAD license is not tied to a single machine. Right? So that you can log in from any device and you'll have your same list of documents. So CAD license, CAD data is not tied to an individual computer, which means you can access it from anywhere. Also with Onshape, we're the first to create a full set of mobile CAD capabilities. And this isn't a viewer or a markup, but you can build real 3D models on a mobile device. 3D parts, assemblies, get all live working motion, all the features that you see in the browser you can access from a mobile device, and that's a first. And again, it's unique because of our architecture. So definitely one of the biggest benefits, accessing your CAD data from anywhere, including an iPhone or an Android phone or tablet. Um, so just really in general accessibility and the ability to get your data anywhere you want it, any place with a web connection, that's the idea. So the last one in my list is performance, and there are a few things that I want to point out with this one, but in particular, hardware performance. And we start talking about hardware in general. How do we manage performance and so on? The questions have come up, and as I mentioned before, we do rely on video memory to render WebGL, but the rendering of the model is the only thing that you see on, or the only performance hit that you see on your machine. So in terms of memory usage and the overall effect that the CAD system has on your machine, it's much, much smaller than a traditional CAD system. So one of the things I like to point out is, if you're using a traditional CAD system and you try and do something else, even if it's just Outlook, or if I'm trying to render something, or if I'm trying to run something that may be just a slight, bit complex, all of a sudden I see performance degradation across everything. My CAD application slows down because I'm running this other thing in the background. So because CAD applications are so bulky, your systems rarely have resources for other things. And so oftentimes just performance of your hardware can have an impact on your time. How much time is spent waiting for something to regenerate, or how much time is spent because other things are running, waiting for something to open or save. So wasting time with hardware performance issues is one thing, but crashes in general are a whole nother. Again, with a traditional CAD system, you're very dependent on one machine, that computer, and if it crashes, there's a good chance you're going to lose something. Even the most diligent, have cloud storage solutions that automatically back up and all these things, but you're going to lose time restoring it. You're going to lose time reinstalling it, all because of the architecture, the nature of traditional CAD. It's an installed application that's file based, which means if you don't have up-to-date backups, if you don't have a way to easily move your operating system back together, you're going to spend some time doing it. So again, just the dependency on a single piece of hardware. Computers crash, hard drives crash, they do it often, and that also means you need to test and manage backup routines, which is more time wasted. Right? So wasting hours, hardware performance issues, wasting hours reinstalling and restoring, that's one of the biggest performance issues that the users have today with traditional CAD. So with Onshape, the idea behind it is your performance is not tied to a single computer. Because we don't use nearly the resources that a traditional CAD application does, we don't have nearly the impact on your computer that a traditional CAD application does, which means you're free to do other things. You can have dozens of tabs up, because Onshape itself is not going to use nearly the resources that an installed CAD application would. The other thing that is worth pointing out is you have much more consistent performance because it has less of an impact overall. It has less of an impact when comparing, when clashing with other applications. It's much less likely to cause your whole system to freeze up because it's not, running locally. So, worst case scenario in Onshape, you can close the tab and reopen it, or refresh the tab and everything rebuilds. So much more consistent performance. It's much easier to bounce back from an issue. If your computer crashes, you can log in from another one. So even if you don't want to restore the machine, you can be within minutes looking at the same model and keep working. You don't lose anything with a crash. You don't lose anything with computer issues or network issues or anything like that. The moment that you lose the machine, Onshape is saved up to. Right? So you go onto another machine, you keep right on working, you've lost nothing. Everything is in real time in Onshape. So the moment it disconnects, you can pick back up on a different machine. So there's no time lost. And the biggest thing is you're not reinstalling and restoring. If you've ever had some kind of a huge hardware problem, that is a lot of time spent reinstalling applications, getting everything set back up, restoring all your files to the way they were, and inevitably you lose something. You lose, whether it's just the amount of time, or you lose this file, or something becomes corrupt. There's all kinds of problems that can come from this. So in general, the idea behind Onshape is any kind of hardware specific to a single computer, you can have fail, and you don't lose anything. Right? You can jump onto another machine, you can jump onto another computer and keep right on working. Right? No reinstalls, no restoring backups, no worrying about any of those details. So these are just some of the things I wanted to highlight. Of course, there are many ways that Onshape can save time, but I wanted to focus on just kind of at a high level, what are the key 5 key things that users today are dealing with that with Onshape are eliminated. And so, those are the things I wanted to point out, just kind of highlighting, a lot of the things that traditional CAD users have to deal with today. So that's what I had planned. Again, I'm going to stick around and answer any questions that you have. So feel free to ask them. Now, going forward, if you're just getting started in Onshape, we really encourage you to try Onshape in your professional work and let us know what you think. And we really encourage you to, give us your feedback. There's a feedback tool that's built into Onshape. We really take feedback seriously. So, again, try Onshape, let us know. Invite others to Onshape and share. I mentioned before sharing your document. It's very easy to do. You hit share, you enter their email address, define their permissions, and hit the share dialog. So very easy to do. And again, you can work together in real time. You can comment together. You can see each other's screen in real time with follow mode. So all kinds of neat collaborative benefits associated with sharing. The last thing I want to mention is if you've been using Onshape a while and maybe you're interested in meeting local users or establishing a local user group, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you get things started. So that is what I had planned for you today. Again, I'm going to stick around and answer any questions, so feel free to type them in. But that's it. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.